Hey, what's up everyone? Alright, in this video and more videos going forwards, I'm going to start doing a new thing where I go through the release notes for each new build of GeoPix and kind of walk you through what's changed, what's new, and what you can kind of expect from this build. So in this video, I just want to dive into what's new in 1.0.19. So this is a pretty significant update, mostly in terms of optimization and improvement to performance. If you look right here, we have several really big things that have been added here, massive optimizations to parameters, and UI, so the left bars and the right bars is pretty much the biggest thing in this. So if you've been using GeoPix in the past and you've been having some issues with performance, you're going to notice a huge boost with this build. So alright, I'm going to take it from the top though and start with the very first thing and just work my way down the list. So under features, one of the cool things that I've added that's also helped performance quite a bit is the new instance object type. This is probably the second biggest deal about this build. If you're doing installations or builds where you have lots of duplicated objects that all kind of look the same, this feature is for you. So let me go and show you briefly how this works. So previously, when you wanted to make something with a lot of duplication, you'd have to pretty much make a fixture. Let's just make a simple LED strip here. Here's 10 pixels vertically. So previously, to make more of these strips, you either had to add more hulls, and add more generators, so this is option one before. You could have one fixture and a few different generators. Option number two was that you just basically duplicated your fixture. So you may have one fixture like this and you duplicate it, and you move this over, and there you go. You have two fixtures and you can set the address offsets for each one. The problem with this is that GeoPix has a lot going on behind the scenes for each of these fixtures. So when you duplicate a fixture, there's a significant amount of overhead that comes with that. And if you have something small and repeatable like a strip that you need to duplicate potentially hundreds or even thousands of times, this gets to be kind of a bottleneck very quickly. In fact, right now in GeoPix, the limit for fixtures is 128. And that will probably raise in the future. That's pretty much a limitation to what is realistically usable before things kind of get too slow and too bogged down. This is the old workflow, and you can still do this depending on what you're trying to accomplish, but the new workflow uses fixtures and instance objects. So let's go ahead and dive into that. So to do the instance object workflow, it's a little bit different. You have a template fixture and you have a main fixture. So let's go ahead and call this little 10 pixel strip template. I'm going to move this off to the side, doesn't really matter where. And then I'm going to make a new fixture, and we'll just put this in the middle here, and we'll call this main. And you can call these things whatever you want, but the names do come up in a little bit. So main here has 0 pix, we've not added any generators, nothing. So since we've done nothing to it, we need to go ahead and set this up. And under here, under chan order, just go ahead and type in RGB if you're doing pixel stuff like that. This should ideally match what your template has, which is RGB as well by default. So with that set up, we can now proceed to make our instance object. So it's over here under the technology menu, under the create tab. So if you create an instance object, it's going to be this feather icon. So I'm just going to right click to place it at the center. And to kind of get this all linked up, I'm going to move this away a little bit so you can see what's going on. We need to take this template object and link it to the instance. So the instance needs something to reference. So the way we do this is we just grab our name, so we can just double click and copy that, and then go back to our instance, and here where it says source, you can change the default child syntax to just basically the name of that fixture, so template. And once we've done that, we have a instance object. One last thing we need to do is offset our main to a different a different universe. Let's just get that offset. I'm sorry, and one last thing we need to do before that, you see we have our shape here, but there's no pixels showing up, and that's because the instance object actually has to be parented to a fixture to work, which is why we have the main fixture right here. So what we need to do is drag instance 1 to main, and now we have an instance right here. So right off the bat, this looks the same as duplicating a fixture, but in addition to translating and duplicating, which is a little bit lighter for this object, you can also do really cool things with the array setup here. So let's go ahead and turn array count to 10, and we can use relative translate here. We can increase this. So now this instance object is basically copying the template 10 times on X and moving it 24 units over each time. So you can kind of combine these things. And you can do cool things with rotation as well. So since we have this instance object, okay, let's just put it at 100 on Z. We set our pivot to negative 100 on Z, and we start rotating. We can get a circular arrangement like this. So that's pretty useful. And you can just increase the count as much as you want to a certain limit. And once you've gotten what you like going on there, maybe you want to boost this up and create like a spiral staircase rail or whatever, you can take this instance 1 and you can actually duplicate it again if you like. So you can use this to essentially chain together templates and make them into one large fixture. So you can go back to the template and you can grab these items and you can still move them around, so you can actually adjust them in real time. If your client says, hey, we have too many LEDs, let's cut that in half, or let's double it, you can go over here to X count and just type in 20, and now you have a denser pixel array. And you'll notice that these instances take they read out the sum total of how many copies they have, so 20 times 24, 480, and then the main is going to show you the sum total of all the pixels of the child instances that it has. So you need to keep an eye on this number. It can't go over, I think, around 4,000 at the moment, but that's probably going to change in the future. And so that's pretty much all there is to it. A couple more things to mention, or just one more thing actually. The instance object, I'm going to duplicate this instance object, and we're going to parent instance 1 to instance 2. And instance 2, we're going to reset the source to child. And I definitely should have changed this value here. Let's go ahead and set this to 3. So what I'm showing you here is that you are able to actually instance instances as well. So you can see here I have instance 2 is instancing its child. Source is set to child, and so instance 1, which is the spiral staircase loop one time around, is now being instanced twice more. So with very few nodes, you can actually create pretty complex arrays and systems that are all dynamic and still linked to the original in real time. You can go back in here and you can actually create, say, a mask. Let's go ahead and make something unique. There we go. So you can go into the fixture editor and we can call this mask test. And now the cool thing is, if we create a projector and we just do a quick fit to scene, and let's turn on a constant color so you can see what's going on. Let's do red. So now if we choose a mask for this projector, mask test, which we just made, you'll see that the mask that we set up here is actually propagated to all of the instances as well. So this is very useful for creating very repetitive masks, but you can work in a very small area and have that kind of duplicated. You can also do this with the tools clone tool, by the way. The clone tool is kind of an older iteration of this kind of workflow, except instead of using a dynamic link to a fixture, you're actually copying attributes and data manually from a source to many targets. So this has its uses too. It just depends what you're trying to do. So alright, that pretty much sums up the instance object. I'm going to go ahead and reset all of this. So the next thing we've added, and this is not as big of a of an add, but it's certainly useful in some cases, is the text node in the IO bin. So if we go over here to the effects rollout, there is a new node here called text. And it's very self-explanatory. If you've used Touch Designer, you'll recognize most of these parameters, but it's pretty much just straightforward text. So I can type in a new string here. Hello world. Turn on word wrap. If we have a lot of stuff, we can increase the font size. We can choose a text color. We can also change the positioning here. We can set this to align with different bounds and some border spacing. So that's pretty nice. You can composite that with anything else in the IO node. It's just a texture at the end of the day. So let's just do like a noise, and let's do a composite. And I'll just show you this real fast. Multiply, and there you go. You've got a little text widget that's basically composited. The fonts, by the way, are going to be pulling from what your system has, which in this case is Windows. So it should be pretty consistent for everyone. And then you can source that in a projector and do what you'd like with it. So, all right, that sums it up for the text effects node. Alright, so moving on down the list, the next thing I will show you here is the audio manager window. So what this means, or what this affects, is the audio capture in GeoPix. So previously, you would create an audio capture node down here, and this looks different than how it was before already. But you'd go down to audio capture and you'd create an audio capture node, and then you'd configure that. The problem with that is we couldn't import and source more than one node from the same audio source. And that's because Touch Designer requires these to be only selecting an output or an input once. And so the way we needed to have this set up in GeoPix was to have a global source, and then we have references to that global source. And that's what this newest feature here, the audio manager window, does. So the way this works, and it's a little bit backwards non-compatible, so you may have to reset up your projects if you're using the old version. Is go to Windows, Tools, and then Audio Manager. And we're going to get a nice little UI here. We have 4 inputs that we can use, and you can turn them on or off. As you can see, my mic right now is doing things, so you can kind of see that happening. So you can pretty much test it, see what's happening, and then once you're pretty much ready to go with your inputs, there we go. I can close this, and we can pull up our audio capture. There we go. And we just open up input 1, input 2, 3, or 4. And you can see that we have the audio waveform coming in, and then we can use that as we would like. So we can connect that to an FFT and get some texture stuff going. And sorry about that, tapping on the mic to see some results here. And that's pretty much it for that node. The audio manager stuff will save with your project, by the way. It will load all these settings and save them. So the global settings will be saved. All right. So undo, this is a big one. People have been asking for it. It's actually a little bit more complicated than I would like it to be, so that's kind of the reason it's taken so long. Undo in the editor is partially implemented. You'll see that it says beta here, and if you click on the question mark, it'll tell you a little bit more about what you can and can't do. Basically, it's not going to work with hulls and pics, but it will work for object level stuff. So if you have a primitive and you're moving it by accident and you want to move it back, undo will do that for you. It's very good for that. Also, if you have like a bunch of objects here and you delete one accidentally, you can undo that and bring it back. Things you can't do is bring back a fixture that has stuff in it. So if I go ahead and make a quick panel, and we can delete this generator. Let's go and duplicate this once. All right, and then we'll go ahead and delete it. If we undo, it brings back the fixture, but of course the sub-object data is missing because I do not have the sub-object data being tracked yet, but that's something I'm going to add probably for build 20. So just keep that in mind. You're going to basically be able to just undo object level stuff. So, okay, moving on. Instance objects have internal array generators. Okay, so we already talked about this. This is actually related to the new instance object type, just a general feature set that comes with. Implemented Uber GUI v4 for parameter UIs. All right, so this is something I mentioned at the beginning of the video under about optimizations, but essentially these kind of UI systems, you'll notice that these look a little bit different, and you have these question marks for the tooltips. So this is all different. This is now being rendered with HTML and CSS using Touch Designer's Web Render Top, which is an amazing node, and it allows you to actually offload the rendering of the UI basically to another thread of your computer. And not only that, it's actually happening much more efficiently than it was before too. So it's a double win, and the node count inside of GeoPix was reduced drastically because of this. Your load times should be down to 10, 20, maybe 25, 30 seconds max. Just moving around the system, as you can see, is very fast, very little frame drop, I would say. 2 to 5 FPS loss just for the time I'm clicking, which is way less than it was before. This also means that resizing the window is a little bit easier. So if I go turn full screen off here, you can see that we're able to resize this very fluidly, so that's nice. So that's really exciting. That's probably one of the biggest optimization changes we've seen in GeoPix, period, in terms of a single change. So very excited about that, and I hope you guys are too. All right, so let's continue onwards. We've got streaming ACN to pixel override. So if you are familiar with the pass-through stuff here, where you can basically have ArtNet coming in raw, have it overwrite anything in GeoPix and just show up on your pixels. You now have a streaming ACN option, and that's pretty much all there is to that. So if you have an external source, a console, or another piece of software that's sending out ArtNet or streaming ACN, you can now import or have that be streamed into GeoPix and directly into your Pix on the viewport for visualization purposes. That's kind of the purpose of that. So cool. So the next thing, added perpetual warning to viewport. Okay, so this is kind of hard to show without going in and changing some stuff in the code, but essentially you're going to get a little warning up here that's yellow that says, hey, or maybe it's right here actually, that this build of GeoPix was built in a different version of Touch Designer than you are running, and that's basically there to tell you that, hey, you might be running into some unexpected issues, but of course it's not going to stop you from running it. So if you want to kind of go off into the Wild West in terms of new versions of Touch that have not been tested, go for it and see what happens. All right. So this is a very small but useful one. So this performance readout here in the top right, it does cost a little bit of performance itself, ironically. So you can now click on this to turn it off and click on it to turn it back on. So if you're in perform mode, you're done setting things up, you don't really care what this says, you've already run through your show, you can turn this off for an extra like 0.25, 0.35, maybe 0.5 milliseconds a frame based on kind of what your system specs are. So good to know about that, I suppose. All right, added a tool under Windows. Awesome. So this came up recently because somebody who was running an AMD card was having issues seeing anything on screen in terms of pics, and we went and explored the issue, and we managed to figure out what was going on. It was a pretty obscure issue, and there was no way I would have found out what it was without actually going into the back end on their computers. So GLSL Diagnostics is a tool that hopefully will let people basically see on a front end what is actually causing issues on the back end, what's preventing them from seeing things. So if you ever have issues with basically any of your pics not showing up, or if you see icons not showing up, or just anything that seems bizarre that seems to be happening in more than one place of the software, go to Windows GLSL Diagnostics, hit the refresh button, and if you see anything here at all, send this to me. Send me an email with a screenshot, or just copy paste the text. That's some of the most useful information I can have for debugging, is the stuff that comes out of this window, if there is any. And same for Python diagnostics. You'll see here that all this stuff says successfully imported. If you see anything here that says like failed to import, let me know, and that's something I need to fix ASAP if that ever happens. So, all right, moving on. Cool. So something that you may have noticed in the past with fixtures is when you create them, let's go ahead and just make a quick line here. Make a generator. So there's a few things you see with a fixture, right? You have your orange line, which is the hull line, then you have your blue line, which is the pix line, which in this case is generated almost on top, but because of the interpolation for 10 points, you get this one that's offset a little bit. So if you ever want to see what your project looks like kind of without these lines in the way, you just want to see the pure light only, no UI, the way you do that is you go to the settings and you just go down this list and you turn pretty much everything off. And previously, these were the only things you could turn off, and so when you come back here, you have this, and this is almost where it should be, but as you can see, we still have some lines, and you can turn this off in the fixtures. We've always been able to do this. However, if you want to turn this off globally, I've now added these here as well, so you can toggle those off, and for all of your fixtures, that will be gone and invisible. So that is a useful toggle to kind of keep in mind. So, all right. So moving on, we have a CSV import export in the scheduler. So if you've used this for our installations, you'll know how useful this is. We have the schedule editor under tools. And so this is a useful pane. You can basically set up scheduled interactions with the perform tab in your widgets there. So I can get current time, go forwards in minutes, create a new entry, and then I can edit the attributes of various things I have in the perform tab. So actually, let me go ahead and show you real fast. Let me just make a slider. Alright, here it is. And let's go ahead and set this slider to 1 when the countdown reaches the next minute. So you'll see here, we're almost there. We've got about 12, maybe 20 seconds left. So we'll just go ahead and wait for this. The CSV, so basically setting this up manually, you'll see that it takes a lot of time to create more than a few entries. So what the CSV import export does is it lets you retrieve what you have here and bring it into a comma separated format, and we're about to set the slider. Just a few more seconds. There you go. It's set, and then it gets consumed and it disappears. So let's go ahead and make another entry, and I'm going to get CSV, and I'm going to pull up Google Docs here so you can kind of see what this looks like. Okay, so I'm just going to go up here to the first cell, and I'm going to hit Control V to paste. And then I'm going to change this to split text into columns. So this is the basic format for the CSV data. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to the hour 14. So let's say we wanted to copy this row and make a few more entries. We can do that, and actually hold on, let me go ahead and reset this. We can see okay, so let's get CSV again, and let's go ahead and paste this again, split the columns. So okay, the format is this. You have year, month, day, hour, minute, second. These columns have to be here. Name has to be there, but your name can be anything. This is just the label that you enter here. And then the last column is the variable column. So you can have as many of these param columns as you want. And the format, the syntax is essentially the name of the widget / slider and the value you want to set it to, separated by a semicolon. And if you have more than one parameter, so you have another slider or you have a button, all you have to do is go in here and say slider 2, set this to 0.25, and then you can go ahead and copy this like so, and you can set this to 58 maybe, 59, and you can set these values, of course, to whatever you'd like. When you're done with that, you can just copy that section, and you can basically just click set CSV, and oh, I'm sorry, it should paste it back, but of course this is not a CSV. This is actually still in comma separated format. I'm sorry, spreadsheet. So what you want to do is go up to File, download as CSV, comma separated, and we can just call this test. And once we've done that, we can simply open this in Notepad, and we've got comma separated values, so we'll just copy this and we'll just set CSV, and there you go. It's been imported and your attributes are all set up, and that lets you kind of build a quick, very large set of entries without spending as much time in this window, which can be a little bit more cumbersome. This will get an overhaul in later months, but for now, that is the way to do very large scale schedules. So, all right, moving along. So this is a pretty simple one, but it's been requested. We have the ability to create fixtures. We already got a fixture. Let's go ahead and go with this one. So previously you can just adjust the pick scale, and these are sprites, meaning they are flat circles that face the camera at all times, and they're a fixed diameter. So now in the settings, you can go over here to Pix render style, and you can change sphere or sprites to spheres if you would like, and this will give you basically real world sized spheres where this is actual centimeters. So 10 centimeters is going to look like this. And these will actually be smaller the further away you zoom out, and closer the more you zoom in. You can actually see these are faceted geometric spheres. So you may have a use for that. You may desire one or the other. I recommend the other more for when you're working in the viewport. When you want to do something for a client, you may want to switch it to this so you actually have physically accurate size. So that is all you need to know about that setting. It's in the settings menu. So duplicate special, if you're familiar with this, let's go ahead and drop a primitive in here. This has been in the tools palette, and it's over here under object tools. So when you move an object and you translate it, this gets updated automatically, and what you could do is hit duplicate offset, and you can kind of create duplicates that continue on that path. So useful. And now, in addition to offset, you also have rotate. So let's go ahead and type in some numbers manually here. Let's do 150, and then rotation of 45, maybe 30. And so now when we hit duplicate, we're actually going to duplicate this up and around. It's going to happen around the center of the origin here, so you'll get this kind of stair-steppy look, which is pretty useful. And that's all there is to explain with that feature. It's just basically a duplication assistant tool. Okay. I did show you this already in a scheduler. There's a get time from current, which helps you get the current time and fill in the fields. Ramp editors you can now delete with delete key as well as the backspace key. So very, very simple. Basically, create a ramp, you edit a ramp, backspace will delete as well as delete. So we'll come back to ramps. There's another thing to mention here that's quite nice, so I'll leave this one here. So full screen windowed button bar at the top. Okay, very simple. This here will maximize or minimize your window. So what I just did is I went to windowed mode. I can also click again to go to full screen, and this is out of the screencast area, so I'm actually going to set this back to 1920 by 1080. I have a large monitor, but That's essentially a full screen windowed, and when you're in windowed mode, you can use the Windows edges to drag, and when you're in full screen mode, you cannot, but you can, however, click in the settings 1920 by 1080 or 1280 by 720, which will bring you back to this size. Okay, so optimizations, I've mentioned and talked about that. Cool, so there's some back-end stuff I did about the global illuminations. There's certain situations that you could use it in where you weren't using it and it was still being calculated to some capacity, so I've managed to optimize and fix that. Translating objects. This used to be a very heavy thing, and I've optimized this significantly as well, and I can show you what that's going to look like now. So if we create a fixture, and let's just create a grid. Let's make a really heavy grid. I'm going to go ahead and set this back to sprites. Okay. Okay, alright, so let's go ahead and set this to 100 by 40, which is just about as big as you can go inside of a single fixture. So this is 4,000 pixels. This used to be very heavy to move, but now when you translate this around, it's practically at 60 frames a second, very, very, very fluid and responsive, so that's very nice. So that's been improved a lot. Okay, I've also optimized and fixed some of the frame drops and lag that you would see when you click on objects in the editor. So this means, let's go ahead and get some objects out here. So clicking here is just a lot snappier. You'll notice that the frame rate stays where it's at also. One of the bugs that we've had for a very long time before was that you couldn't click on things once usually to get them to select. It was a little bit buggy. You had to double click twice. That's been fixed, I think, for sure this time, and you have to let me know if that comes back, because I think it's fixed. Alright, so optimizations in I/O. Over here, previously when you hovered over a node, you would get all of the inputs and outputs labeled. Now you only get that when you hover over a certain output or input. So this is a lot more efficient, like hugely more efficient, and this is saving us a lot of performance and optimization over here. This area of the software got a lot of love, some of which I did not document in the main feature list of things in build 19, but it's just very different experience, and connecting things is a lot more fluid. These little squares get bigger, smaller. I might have these actually mentioned, so we'll come back to this if that's the case. Alright, changes, IO graph uses, yeah, okay, so this is a big change. If you're familiar with Touch Designer, you're going to be particularly happy about this, but even if you're not, it was pretty cumbersome, because before you had to hit Q, W, E, R to kind of select the different modes that you wanted to be in, and that's no longer necessary. Everything is context-based, so instead of a marquee mode, you just right-click drag, and you're marquee selecting. To move your graph around, you left-click drag, and to move a node around, you left-click drag a node. If you're not dragging, and you're just shift-clicking, you can kind of select things that way. So it's a lot faster, and it's basically using the same kind of control scheme that Touch Designer has, which is very, very nice. And so once you get used to it, you're going to be flying around the I/O tab much faster. So, okay, this is another useful quality of life change that's happened in the editor. So previously, Shift was the add to selection button, and now Control is. So if I hit Control, it essentially toggles the selection of whatever I click on. Shift will actually select everything between 2 points. So let's go ahead and duplicate this a few times. If I have fixture 1, then I shift select, click fixture 9, all primitives. I get this whole list selected, and so I can select a couple things and then deselect a few, and you can kind of navigate through that very easily. And the way this works, if you have parented hierarchies, if they're hidden, and you do a shift select, it does not select the children, so that's something to note as well. Okay. So when you click New File and load your projects, this no longer resets the size of the window. This is just a quality of life thing. It does not happen anymore. So no need to explain that. Channel monitor, we've modified the navigation a little bit as well. So if you bring up the channel monitor and you use the mouse wheel to zoom out, you do not need to hold Alt to pan anymore. It's all going to be basically context-based as well, just like the I/O tab. Edit offsets is the same way. You don't have to right or alt click or anything. You just left click to place and you right click to drag. So that's pretty much all there is to that. That should speed up workflow a little bit in that window. Let's see, where were we? Cool. So creating keys in the ramp editor. This is the other thing I mentioned that we were going to touch on here. Let's go ahead and delete some of this other nonsense. So ramps, if you open the editor here, previously when you made a key, the key would just be the same color every time. It'd be like a white key. So now the actual key when created takes on the color of that part of the ramp where you clicked. So if I have blue and I have red and I click here, this key will be as close to that pinkish color as possible. So now I can kind of adjust it from there as needed. So simple quality of life improvement to the ramp editor, which is something you see in a lot of other softwares. This one you've probably already noticed. Most of the fonts, pretty much all the fonts have been kind of combed over and kind of revised to be more consistent. So we're still using the kind of GeoPix font up here and a few select other places, but for the most part we've switched to a more screen-friendly, readability-friendly font, and this will probably evolve again somewhere in the not too distant future, but it looks a lot better, I think. But let me know if you have any ideas or suggestions, and we'll continue to improve that as time goes on. Alright, so default mode is no longer full screen but windowed. So that's basically when you start GeoPix, you're going to have a little bit of extra space for your taskbar and stuff like that. That's all that means. Okay, fixes. This is going to be a little bit faster because most of these are pretty straightforward. So the green pulsing for fixtures. This now basically works with more than one. Before Alright, so for the rest of the fixes, we have the first thing here, green pulsing selection highlighting. If we make a fixture and we just add a hull and generate some stuff here, you'll remember that if you click on it, it flashes green. But the issue we had was that if you had multiple fixtures selected, you would only get the last one that you selected flashing green. That's no longer the case. All the ones you have selected flash green, and that's also true in real life if you have your pixel controller set up. So this makes it a little bit easier to select things and kind of figure out what's what in terms of your digital versus real kind of equivalence. So that's pretty much all there is to say about that. Fixed bug demo. Okay, so there's nothing most of you would have noticed, but if you have a Pro license, you will not see the demo text up here, and you will also not see it under help, and that's because you have the highest license possible and there's nothing else to test. So that was a bug I fixed, and that's all there is there. Alright, fix multiple issues surrounding duplication. Okay, so this was a pretty annoying issue. I'm sure most of you have ran into this at some point. Very simple change though. Essentially, if we have a collection of nodes that are all wired up, and we duplicate that, it stays connected, and we have the selection maintained, so we can immediately start moving it around. So this is a big quality of life improvement. There's a bug here where like the connections would get all wonky and kind of broken, and then the selection would also get broken, so that's been fixed. Fixed some visibility issues for some tabs and stuff when you're in video record mode. So if you go here to Tools, Windows, screen record, go to full screen. This only works in the editor, by the way. You now have a cleaner looking viewport. So, and if you want to hide this, you can do that in the settings by turning it off, but it's not going to show up in the render either way. So, okay. There was a bug where I/O lines in the I/O tab did not always load, these little orange things, so that's been fixed. There was a weird issue where PixFrame nodes would have these little black connector dots even though there's nothing to connect with a PixFrame node, so that's also been fixed. If you create, I guess it would be at the top, huh? Yeah, okay. If you create one of these, you'll see that we have inputs to drive stuff but no outputs, which is correct. Alright, so I mentioned this earlier, but there was some bugs for AMD cards where things were invisible, like the play start buttons and the picks as well. So if you had an AMD card and you were having issues, it may be your lucky day. Try it again and see what happens. And if you have issues, please let me know. Check out the GLSL diagnostics under Windows, and I would love to fix any more issues related to this. We're getting pretty close to compatibility with more and more cards, so that's great. Basically, these are the two same bugs. They were related to the same issue in the AMD cards. Yeah, so I mentioned this. There is a bug where you have to double click in the viewport to select things. That's been fixed. There's also a small bug that caused pics to be selected when you were tumbling the camera, so that's been fixed as well. Oh, this is a pretty big one. More annoying because you can fix this manually, but when you had a let's go and delete all that stuff and go back to the editor. If you had a fixture and let's go and open our channel monitor so you can see what's happening here. Let's use a much smaller pixel count, 10, 1. Okay, there we go. So when you duplicate this fixture, the next fixture gets pretty much offset so that it's right at the very end. You'll see this here with the blocks. Right? This happens automatically, and what it's doing when you duplicate is it's setting the offsets here to new values so that these do not overlap. Because if they overlap, you get a warning that says fixture overlap, and you got to fix that manually. The issue, if you had a fixture over 170 pixels, right, and this is just RGB wise, let's go ahead and do that. Let's make this 170. Actually, it would need to be just over 170, so 171. Because 171 times 3 channels is, 170 times 3 is 510, and 171 times 3 is 513, which means you're just over the limit of one universe, so you have to wrap that around the next row. So if you go all the way over here to the right, you'll see that these last two channels are not being utilized, even though we have spillover coming onto here. And that's because fixtures have this parameter called pix split, and when it's set to off, it does not split a pix across universes. It depends what kind of pixel controller you're using. The pix lights inherently do not split pixels, so that's why they round things off at 170 in terms of pixels, and the next pixel 171 starts on the next universe. Some controllers, like the Teensy and others, will not have this, or you can set it up to be either or. So that's what this is for. It's a compatibility settings. When you turn this on, you'll see that we go from 3 on the next universe to 1. And if we go over here to the right, you'll see that we are consuming every single channel in our first universe. The problem that we had before, let's go and see if we can resimulate this. So with pix split off, which is the default, if you duplicate this, it should have worked fine. This was always fine, I think. Let's see. Yeah, so it would offset things properly, but if pix split was on and we were to duplicate this before, it would actually still place it here. It would still have this gap. So it didn't respect the splitting offsets, and that had some other bugs that cascaded and became bigger issues in certain circumstances. So anyways, that's been fixed. Doesn't matter if you have this on or off. The offsets that happen automatically should now be perfectly aligned to the end of the last fixture. So very nice kind of quality of life fix there. So there's a small bug in the Pixel Node Manager. I'll be diving into this in a new video, talking about some of the new Arduino code I'm pretty much putting out there for you guys to use with GeoPix. But anyways, fixed a bug in the manager. Let's see. Oh yeah, there's another bug for AMD cards where after a certain number of fixtures, all of your picks will disappear. So this has been fixed as well. Again, it's all related to the same bug with the AMD cards up here. Fixed bug where IO bin needs to be closed. Okay, yeah, so there's a simple issue with the IO bin. So it's been fixed now, but if you had, say, ramp 1 and you had your IO textures open, if you added a new object to the IO graph, that would not show up here until you closed and reopened. So that's been fixed. Alright, last one. Fixed a bug, GPU optimization. Yeah, so this is an issue that you probably never even saw, but it was a slight inefficiency that had to do with switching tabs. So if you go over here to settings and you turn on optimize GPU memory, this is going to increase, it's going to decrease the amount of GPU memory that's consumed, but it's going to be a little bit chuggier when you're flipping through tabs, because every time you leave a tab, it's going to try to basically uncache or basically unstore all of that GPU data and release it back, garbage collect it. So there is some issues with that I've fixed as well, so that should work more. So if you turn this on, if you're basically running low on GPU memory, but if you want your software to kind of respond faster and be a little snappier, leave it off like it is by default. So alright, that pretty much does it for the changes. Thanks for watching, and I hope you guys like it. Let me know if you find any bugs, issues, or have any suggestions. Thanks.